Welcome back to the Two Creations, One Creator podcast. I am your host, Isaac Bush, today joined by a good friend of mine. He's in my life group and movie critic, perchance,
Perchance.
Canaan McKay. Canaan, how's it going, man?
This is like the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm like a new podcast aficionado, and I've actually, I think, been listening to more podcasts than I have actual music, which is like an
That's
entirely new
insane.
thing. And so to think of being on one is just
Very interesting.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you
Dang.
on, man. I would say, I had Bargo on last week. I was like, okay, if I'm having Bargo on, I also really want to have Kanan on. I want to have Emerson on. Which Emerson will be on at some point later on this podcast. I'll tell them. But I'm very excited to have you on because you're very knowledgeable about a lot of things, and we've actually discussed a multitude of topics. So, for those listening right now, be expecting Kanan to be on in later weeks, coming months, if you will.
You never know.
You never know. You never know because things,
It's all I'm gonna say.
things could play out in
You never
certain
know.
ways. You never know. You never know. But how's your week been, man?
It's been good. I guess you could say not like overburdened or burnt out, just it can be it's school is being more like taxing to me than
Hmm.
maybe one would appreciate.
Sure.
And so learning to prioritize and
Hmm.
just like treat my time well, and
Yes.
purposefully has been a challenge. But
Mhm.
I mean, I'm doing great. I mean, college has been good to me,
That's good.
in all spheres of life, I feel like. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. I'm glad that what's it called? I mean, it might be a little tiresome right now, a little bit more
Yeah.
taxing
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
say, but it's also what we're a week away from finals.
Yeah.
So it's about to start coming up to that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. That's true.
My introducing Christian ministry class, which I'm in, which I'm love that class so far. So professors, if you are listening to this, which I don't
You
know
should be
why,
listening to it.
Dr. Hanley, if you're listening to this.
Assign this to your students, Dr. Hanley. I'm joking.
But I just wasn't expecting. I had 3 assignments in that class this week, which has not happened yet, and I was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
all right." I wasn't expecting that, so that was a little tedious, but
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
okay. Again,
Whatever happens, happens. It's
right,
that kind of thing,
right.
yeah.
I'm on this really big Ecclesiastes kick,
Yeah.
right? I've been
Yeah.
reading Ecclesiastes every morning
Mhm.
before I get my day started. Start off the
Mhm.
day with a little
Very good.
depression, but
Yeah. Oh
no,
gosh. No. Yeah.
no,
Go.
I'm just kidding. There's a lot of beauty in that. I could do a whole podcast on my love for Ecclesiastes
Let's do it. Why not?
right now.
Maybe
Au
maybe
audible, audible.
one
Almo
more
al
dude, one more dash. No, I'm joking.
podcast for another day, podcast for another I
You
could
could.
whip it out right now, but
Now we're
no,
talking.
we're not going to. Not going to.
We have a
But,
good topic
right,
prepared for you all.
we do. I'm excited to talk about this. I'm excited to talk about this. But I've been a lot more grateful. I've been very taxed as well recently, mentally
Yeah.
tired. But even in that, I'm so grateful because I also understand that nothing matters. So at the end of the
Mm.
day, these what's it called, taxing thoughts and these taxing problems,
Mm.
I need to be focused on glorifying Christ in them. And so, but
Yeah.
different topic for another day. We're
Yeah.
here to talk about you some too. So would you mind giving your testimony as brief or as long as you would like?
Yeah, I have no clue how long this will go. And well,
That's
I'll just
okay.
see how it goes and we'll roll with it.
Mhm.
So,
Don't quench the
yeah,
spirit.
yeah, so my name is Kanan and I am I guess you could say second year student at the Cumberlands.
Mhm.
I'm kind of like I don't want to be that guy who's like, yeah, man, I'm actually a junior, but I'm like actually a sophomore. Like,
Right.
I just want to be I don't want to be that like
Yeah, yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah,
Sure, sure.
just
Yeah.
that jerk. But yeah, I mean, second year here, from the great city of Cincinnati, Ohio, the greater Cincinnati area, which my friend Isaac is actually very familiar with that area
Yes.
as well.
Fortunately,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Question.
Okay.
You mentioned Bibi Bop.
Yes. And
Was
last
that
week.
one was that in like a shopping center?
No, yeah, not it wasn't like in a mall or anything, but
Yeah.
there's stores it was all part of the same building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's like my neck of the woods.
Really?
Like maybe like 10 minutes, 15 minutes from my house.
Okay.
And I've been there like so much.
Yeah.
Bibi Bop's okay, besides the point.
Baby
Anyways,
Bop is not good.
okay, whatever. All
We
right.
can topic for another day as well.
Yeah, yeah. I'm doing bad at this. Okay,
You're
anyways.
okay, man. No, it's all right.
That's all
You're
right. It's
killing
all
it.
right. Oh, thank you, man. All right. Um yeah, so I grew up in Cincinnati and faith I guess I could say was like um, part of my life from the womb, essentially.
Mhm.
My father was a pastor, a newly hired youth pastor at our home church that he's still the lead pastor at now, um, 20 years later, right? And so, I mean, I was preached over while I was in the womb by pastors and family members, and you know, all the Christianity has just been a part of my life, I guess. Um, yeah, for all of my life. I really was like a weird kid in the sense that like I treated faith and religiosity and spirituality in like a very um peculiar light, I guess.
Okay.
It was and I'm sure I'm not the only child who struggled with this. Um Probably most children actually
Yeah.
struggle with this. I could be overthinking it, but um like I always viewed God in the sense of he's just above me
Okay.
and not like interacting
Mhm.
with the world that I'm in. He's a God who just has a bunch of rules and I need to follow them. And he will be happy with me if I follow with him, and he will not be happy with me if I don't follow them.
Sure.
Which and that is true in some sense. It's not nearly the gist of the faith. Um, and I've learned that over the years. That's not like I'm not trying to bash like the way I was treated growing up or who taught me. They were all very like doctrinally sound. It was just like an internal thing. I feel like that led me to feel that way.
Mhm.
And so that resulted in a very worrisome, anxious like childhood from the very beginning. It's usually stated that like anxiety and depression can start out mainly in the teenage, like adolescent years. But I can attest that some of the worst periods of my life revolving around mental health and emotional health were the formative years of my age, like
Mhm.
growing up in grade school and elementary school and junior high, and when I was homeschooled for a brief period. I can remember my first like real, I guess you could call it like panic attack,
Okay.
um, when I was like 7 or 8 at an amusement park in Indiana. Like I remember it very vividly. Um, yeah, it's just not fun stuff, and it was I had to learn how to deal with it from a very early age, and I didn't know I was dealing with it. I was scared of things that like I shouldn't be scared of, and it was just weird. That being said, though, this is really where it gets really interesting. Actually, is I genuinely do not know when the moment of regeneration and like transformation happened,
Sure.
right? And it's something that troubled me for a long part of my life. I I remember sitting down with my mother on our kitchen floor in the dining room. Not no, it's the kitchen, not the dining room. And her just like asking me if I had any interest in accepting Christ. And I think I had an idea of what that meant.
Mhm.
She wasn't trying to like pressure me into anything. I mean it was just a lot for me in the moment. And I did pray a prayer and I maybe had true faith, saving faith,
Mhm.
you know? It's just hard looking back to, like, actually determine the legitimacy of that.
Sure.
And so I struggled with that for the rest of my childhood, essentially, until I was at a Christian camp when I was out of 7th grade and going into 8th grade, and the pastor gave an altar call the first night of the camp. It was July 2nd, 2018, I believe, and he said that people in the room were in one of 3 camps. It was, yes, I know that when I die, when Christ comes back, I will be with him in eternal glory forever. The second one was, when I die, I know for a fact that I will not be there. Um, I may not know if this is like a thing, but if it were to be true, then
Mhm.
I'm in the bad, no good camp. The
Right.
It's not fun camp. And then thirdly was the I don't know camp.
Okay.
And that was just like incredibly profound to me because all that I had been told throughout
Mhm.
my childhood was that you're in one of two camps, either know or you don't.
Mhm.
And for all my childhood, I was in the I don't know camp.
Mhm.
Yeah, I prayed a prayer. I believed in God. I believed in Jesus, that he was a person, that, he was a good guy. I believed in all the miracles of the Bible and such, right?
Right.
And so it just caused a lot of confusion, I guess, and conviction, I would even say,
Mhm.
because I didn't know if it was pure, that I actually laid down my life, because I was doing the same things I was doing beforehand. And so I went up and talked with my youth pastor, and I believe I gave my life to Christ that day.
Mhm.
Now I could have given my life to Christ with my mother when I
Much
was
earlier. Right.
7 or 8, and the process of sanctification just was very elongated.
Mhm.
Even after I made that decision to kind of reaffirm my faith, kinda I don't like the term rededicate, because you only dedicate your life
Once.
once,
Mhm.
right? Just made a decision that would provide me with reassurance and more assurance of my salvation. But even after that moment, there were still doubts,
Mhm.
and my anxiety was still very bad. I'm a hypochondriac, right? So there was a large period of my life where either I didn't believe I was saved and that if I died, I was going to go to hell and God was mad at me, or I believed that I was going to die of like a terminal illness within a year. And I just drove myself crazy
Mhm.
for a large period of high school. And I was dealing with a lot of sin in my life that hadn't been like actually recognized, I guess. And the weird thing about my story is there's not like a moment where like everything shifted.
Yeah.
The beautiful thing about the story that I've been able to be a part of, right, is that it's been like kind of elongated, over the period of my life. Just like into one big thing, you know?
Yeah.
God's hand has been present, and I have been brought from death to life. I don't My dad uses analogy, okay? I'm sitting in a chair,
Okay.
right? Have you ever sat in a chair and you didn't know whether or not, like, you sat in the chair an hour or 2 hours ago, but you know you're sitting in the chair,
Yes.
right? I'm having that moment in my spiritual life, just,
Okay.
like, constantly. I know I'm trusting in Christ.
But you just don't know when it started.
I don't know when I sat down, but I know
Okay.
I'm sitting down right
Mhm.
here, right now. And it was through numerous mentors, godly men in my life, godly women in my life, friends who were just there for me, that somehow, some way, I'm here and I'm sold out for Jesus,
Right.
you know?
Mhm.
And that's the beautiful thing about it. I still struggle with temptation. I still struggle with sin. I struggle with mental health and all those things. Those are still very much a part of my life. They are healed by Christ, and they will be no more when I'm in heaven, right?
Mhm.
But it's just so cool to see how God's hand has been a part of my entire life. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess that'd be it.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit longer than I had hoped for, but
Totally
it's
all
all
good.
right. It's all right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Dude, thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. That's a great testimony. And honestly, I even kind of like relate to the level of not knowing for certain when you came to faith. Because for me, it was like I'm not gonna go over my whole testimony because it's out there. People, the listeners, they know the listeners know. The
That's
listeners know.
right.
But it's still a level of like in my testimony, I gave my life to Christ in September at a conference of also 2018. And what happened was I don't know, like, it wasn't necessarily a distinct moment of, like, overwhelming the Spirit overwhelming me in that moment, like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I need to be saved."
Mm.
I was like it was powerful, and I know that from that point on, I just began to live a much more Christ-centered,
Yeah.
like, focus, but I don't think it was any distinct moment. It was much more I don't wanna say logical,
There was I guess
but,
there
like
was, like, a there is a moment when the spirit, like, enters you,
yes,
right?
yes, but it's kinda hard to
It's hard to distinguish when that
right.
was.
Some people, it's, like, very easy, like,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying this is only for people that, like, were previously drug addicts or alcoholics, but, like, for them who are struggling in that instantly, and then it immediately goes away. Those people were like, "Oh, yeah, it's very easy for you to find where that is because as soon as you give your life to Christ, you're
Yeah.
overwhelmed by
Oh,
this
for sure.
spirit." For whereas me, it was more of like a continuous, I guess, maybe being around other
Mhm.
followers of Christ and a continuous presence of the Spirit that opened and softened my heart to it, gave my life to Christ. So I don't have a
Yeah.
necessarily distinct of, yes, I was worshiping during this moment and that's when I
Yeah.
felt him. Right.
Something you have to appreciate, and this is something that I've had to force myself to appreciate, is the fact that God's view of time
Mhm.
is not your view of time, right? And so what you could think was like a long process, right? My
Right.
salvation has been a process in the works for some period of time.
Sure.
Like God's not worried about the longevity. Like his hand is going to be over that situation, for
Mhm.
the entirety of that situation.
Absolutely.
And it's so beautiful
Mhm.
as well. Like paints a very, very just magnificent picture of God and his willingness to enter your story. So yeah.
Mhm. And I mean, not to keep looping back into Ecclesiastes, but that's, like, very much right there as a, I can't distinctly remember it being, like, a very deliberate thing that's talked about, but nothing about like, if you read Ecclesiastes at face value, it is that's why people are like, "Oh, this book is so depressing." But when
That's
you,
right.
like,
Yeah.
put the implication of the that God is important, God is also willing to be wants to be in every facet of your
Mm,
life. So, I
very
mean,
good.
yeah, I think that's super cool, very
Yeah.
powerful. Great testimony, man. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So now for the actual topic of discussion, which involves film and movies. As you listeners may or may not know, I am an ex-movie critic.
What does that mean? Were
So
you
I was a movie critic, right? I was someone who actively like sought to watch as many movies as I could in a
Mhm.
week, like maybe averaging 4 or 5 at
Okay.
one period of time. So essentially where it started is I fell off a car one time and fractured my wrist for 6 weeks.
Sorry to hear that.
And it would no, it was awesome. It made me so much better at basketball, and it's a fun story,
Yeah.
and I became a movie critic. So, only gained from me fracturing my wrist. My wrist pops when I do that,
Mhm.
like, twist my
Yeah.
wrist, but, you know, you give and you take a little.
Mhm.
But, so I watched all the Marvel movies in order.
Mhm.
And so I was like, "Well, if I'm gonna do that, I'm a big list guy, I gotta rank them.
Yeah.
I gotta, like, what's called and if I'm gonna rank them, I have to have a method in there."
Yeah. Yeah.
So it started with that, and then it kind of expanded into, like, just watching a lot of movies, watching a lot of, whatever, like, in school, out of school, whatnot. I would just be watching movies and
Mhm.
reviewing them. I have since then not done it nearly as much like my friend Micah, co-host for those who remember him,
Rest in peace.
unfortunately.
Sure.
But, what's it called, he watches a lot more movies than me. A lot of my other movie critic friends, back home, they watch a lot more movies than me and are a lot more knowledgeable about film
Mhm.
than I am.
Yeah.
But I used to want to work on movies
Okay.
prior to what's called my calling to counseling.
Yeah.
So, I have was a movie critic. I was very into it.
Mhm.
And so now it's just a much more scaled back.
Yeah.
What like I watch
You're more
may
appreciative and
no, no,
critical.
no. I'm still
You're
critical,
still
very,
critical.
very critical
Okay.
of the movies that I watch. I just understand I am lacking in knowledge in it now. Before I did not,
Yeah.
and I also now I watch maybe a movie every 2 weeks
Mhm.
versus like multiple movies in a
Yeah.
week. So the scaling of it has gone back. I still critique movies as I watch them, and if I'm watching a movie with you, one of my biggest pet peeves is that people who talk during movies or like are on their phone grinds my gears. I just wanna, like, sit there this is, like, an average movie watching experience for me is sitting there watching it, going through it in
Mhm.
my head, like, let my mind work and like chew the cud of
Yeah.
what this
Oh,
movie's
yeah.
like giving me. But then someone's like, "Hey, what's going on right now?"
Why is he doing that? Why is she doing that?
It's like, well, if you would have watched the movie, you would know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big pet peeve. But ex movie critic of me, I have been of this opinion a while. Of there's a lot more to do when it comes to spirituality in movies, even secular movies,
Yeah,
than we see. And you also are of the same opinion.
I agree.
So, I mean, do you have something specifically that's been like on your mind regarding that?
Can I share, like, why I like, how I got into movies
Yeah,
first?
yeah,
Just so, like, we
absolutely.
have, like, a background as
Sure.
to, like, I think I'm credible to be here. Maybe. I was
Sure.
invited and you were like, "We can talk about the sovereignty of God or movies." And I was like, "Okay, let's weigh it down, what do I know more about?" So, I mean, I think I don't know if I'm, like, of the level to be claiming of critic identity,
Okay,
I guess. I don't know enough yet.
sure.
I knew so throughout my upbringing, I mean, I knew what movies were. I'd seen, like, kids' movies and all the Marvel movies and stuff.
Yeah.
For a lot of my upbringing, though, I think my dad and my brother were actually more, like, into it all
Mhm.
than I was, and I was just kinda there for the ride. I remember going and seeing Infinity War with my brother and my
Sure.
father just 'cause, it was just, like, guys in the family kinda night, and I was like, I'll watch it. I wasn't nearly as, like, into, like, the lore and Easter eggs as they were,
Mhm.
but it wasn't till I quit basketball
Mhm.
after my 8th grade junior high season, right?
Okay.
And I had conversations with my father and my mother, and I was like, "I don't wanna sit in my bed after I come home from school and just do nothing." And so they were asserting that I should pursue that as well, which is good. So I gave it thought, and I said, "You know what? I think I'm gonna join the school drama department."
Okay.
I had done, like,
Like
church musicals.
drama, theater.
Yeah, all the
Yeah.
theater stuff. I'd done musicals, and I'd done shows when I was, like, young for my church, like Christmas pageants and such, and I actually was pretty good. You can ask people who were there. They would
Okay.
they would affirm that claim.
Mhm. Mother McKay.
That's right, they
Yeah.
would. And so, it was Wizard of Oz was my first, like, big production that I was a part of, and I was the gatekeeper to Emerald City.
Mm.
And I just fell in love with what it is to put on a show,
Mhm.
put on a story,
Sure, yeah.
and getting to be a part of making all of it come to life,
Mhm.
making it like in an alternative reality real,
Yeah.
in a sense. And so there would be nights where I was super inspired and like ready to run through a wall
Mhm.
for just like theater and storytelling. And my sophomore freshman year self would search up on YouTube like best acting performances of all time. And there'd be like a violin instrumental in the background, and it'd be just like Heath Ledger as Joker, Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood. I've abandoned my child, and various of like all these movies that I'd like never really like heard of.
Sure.
And I was like, man, these people are good. Like
Mhm.
this is like, I'll be honest, I'm not a big Marvel guy,
That's fine.
you know,
Yeah, that's fine.
but this is like genuine, and I
Mhm.
can see like passion in these people.
Absolutely.
Like I want that,
Mhm.
you know? And so I kind of made a list of all the movies that were listed on these videos, and I tried and watched as many as I could. And so high school was just a time where I associate a movie with that time,
Mhm.
right? Which is a beautiful thing about it. So
Absolutely.
that's at least how I got into movies and how I became a film lover. I have a letterbox. It's C_McKay. It's pretty good.
Right. I'm familiar with Letterbox. I don't have Letterbox. I have an app called Q because I wasn't about to go. I've like over 100 movies reviewed on my
Yeah.
notes app and my phone. I was not about to go over, re-review them, write down why I reviewed it the way I did. I was just like, it's fine. No, yeah, but that's very I think that gives you like a good background in it, especially because you did theater and like you like early on for me, I did not appreciate true cinema,
Mhm.
right? Absolute cinema, if you will.
Yeah.
But, I didn't appreciate true cinema. I just kinda wanted, like, entertaining storytelling,
Mhm.
whatnot. But then as you go on, you kinda, like, appreciate that
That's
at
right.
a certain level. And kind of, like, getting into, like, now the more
Mhm.
spirituality
Yeah.
aspect of it, I do think, when it comes to, like I think there's so many different dynamics when it comes to film
Mm.
that reflect, like, society. So, like, for example, a character that is that we can relate to,
Oh, for sure.
right? Is something that is very wanting to be achieved
Mm.
in a lot of modern movies, like a protagonist that we can relate to, even an antagonist that we can
Oh,
relate
yeah.
to. It's like a matter of like, oh, we understand that, right? And we
Yeah.
feel that way. And it's just at a level of extremity,
Yeah.
right? Or something around along those lines.
Mhm.
And so I think it's interesting to see how it reflects in culture. I think you could also then look at like the exterior, like the actual real world,
Oh,
where
yeah.
there's actors who like are, acting these roles
Mhm.
out, and then how there's a level of I don't want to say like falsely characterizing yourself, but, like, method acting
Oh,
or,
yeah.
like, how
Very
they'll
familiar.
really get into it, like,
Mhm.
outside they become that
Yeah.
person on what's it called?
It's
Like, it's
fascinating.
very fascinating
Yeah.
on, like, a psychological level, but,
Mhm.
like, also when you look at that in, like, a faith sense
Oh,
as
yeah.
well, that means that, like, if they're able to do it, right, so are
Mm.
we.
Oh, wow.
And so, like, kind of in that same sense of we really obviously no one's gonna become Paul,
Yeah.
right? Or like but like
That's
are we
really
not
good.
applying that same type of logic? Not method acting Jesus, of
Oh, yeah.
course, but like doing our best,
Imitate
like, try to
Paul.
imitate
Yeah.
imitate
Yeah.
the Christ-like mannerisms. Or, like, I'm not gonna, like we're gonna get into a whole bunch of stuff, but there's, like, spiritual warfare, spiritual opposition with, like, demonic movies and things like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of area and ground to cover, and I
Mhm.
don't expect to cover every
Mm.
detail of it in this
Mm.
podcast because then we'd be here for 4,
All
5
night.
hours. Like, I'm sure both of us could get here yapping
Yeah.
about a bunch of stuff. So what's something that sticks out to you in film that on a spiritual level
Mhm.
that, like, you resonate with or
Yeah.
connect with?
I think there are numerous things, and I'll kind of try and go one by one and keep it relatively brief. I could go very long, so
Mhm. Well, if
yeah.
something's good,
Yeah.
don't quench the
Yeah, yeah.
spirit, of
No, for
course.
sure, for sure. I think firstly, what firstly comes to mind is it highlights the redemptive nature of this universe.
Mhm,
And this may be out there, but more of me is beginning to think that humans were created to be redeemed, to be sought after,
okay.
in a sense. God created humanity
Mhm,
with the desire to know them and love them, also with the desire that if anything were to go wrong, that he would redeem them.
mhm.
And we know stuff did go wrong,
Right, and he
right?
knew stuff would
And
get
he knew
wrong.
stuff would go wrong, but the plan was in his mind all along.
Mhm,
Every movie you watch, it could be large scale or smaller scale,
mhm.
essentially has these components, right? There's a rising action, right?
Okay.
And then you have a conflict.
Mhm.
There is an incompleteness that needs to become complete
Yes.
in its most simple
Manner,
sense,
right.
right? And the rest of that movie, part that you're enthralled by and obsessed with, is how can this broken situation, broken thing,
Mhm,
become not broken?
mhm.
And my dad's a big movie lover. I remember watching a movie with him. I think it was my senior year of high school, and the ending was kind of not an ending,
Okay.
right? There was still stuff left to be resolved,
Yes.
and he was just like infuriated.
Mhm,
And so I think it points to a desire for humans to find an an ending point,
mhm,
right? A point where all wrongs will be made right.
mhm,
And so I think the infatuation and attraction that people have towards film points to an inner desire to see wrong made right,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
In some sense. I was watching for my church history class a few days ago, actually, a video in which Tim Keller, are you familiar with Tim Keller?
Not at all.
So Tim Keller is a famous pastor, evangelist, theologian.
Sure.
He actually sadly passed away from
Oh.
brain cancer a few years back, but he's an incredibly smart guy. And he's talking with Google employees at like a tech talk or whatever. I think I'm unfamiliar with the term, but he goes and kind of makes an argument for a reasonable base for Christianity
Mhm.
as to why it should be real. And so his three components are this. Actually, I don't know if I know all three. I know two of them. You'd have trouble without it, right?
Mhm.
I think the second was your life is better with it, and the third is the beauty found within it. And I'm gonna focus on the beauty found within it.
Sure.
He referenced, I think it's a book by Sylvia Plath, who's a famous poet called The Bell Jar. I could be wrong, but I did some research. And essentially what the bell jar is Sylvia Plath, this renowned author and poet, writes her only book, and she introduces the main character, her life, her struggles,
Mhm.
gets to know the character. This wasn't her plan. This is not like entirely analogous towards the gospel, by the way. Like this is kind of getting there, but I
Right.
think there's truth found within it. So she gets really close with this character and all of a sudden starts to feel compassion for her. This kind of figment of her imagination, I guess I could say,
Okay.
that she's writing down and becoming connected to. And the author places herself in the story, like unbeknownst to, is that even a word? Unbeknownst, whatever.
Yes, it is.
It is. Unbeknownst to herself and to the book, she feels sorrow and heartbreak for the character, introduces herself to the story and saves her. And I think that's kind of a picture of the gospel.
Okay. Oh, actually, I do see that. Yes.
God knew that he was going to enter himself into the
Right.
story. He had been interacting with his
Humanity.
story,
Mhm.
but he inserted himself in the form of Christ in the physical body, the human. There's Saint I forget it. I think it's Saint Gregory. It's a church father. He says, humanity cannot be restored unless it is assumed. Right? There is a part of our being, our human nature, not our spiritual, just invisible part. There is a part of our physical, tangible selves that is broken
Mhm.
and that needs to be resolved. And so Christ assumes that part
Mhm.
of humanity, assumes the physical humanness.
Mhm.
And he goes and he dies and he saves us. And at the end, every wrong will be made right. There will be no tears. Every tear will be wiped away. Justice will be fully delivered. Right. And we have hope in that. So that's my first thing is I think it's the power of the redemptive nature of film and the attraction that people have towards it is a beautiful thing, right? Secondly, this is less direct, but I think it's powerful.
Mhm.
We often think of spirituality purely in the sense of man to God. That's all it is. God saves man. God and man are reconciled, right? What we often forget, and this is scriptural, is that the gospel reconciles man to man,
Yes.
right?
Mhm. Love your neighbor as yourself,
That's
if you
right.
will.
And the only way you can do that purely is with the presence of Christ.
Right.
There
Because
is a
what is love? In First John 4.
I'm sorry.
But, like, what is love? In, First John 4,
So A,
God
you're
is
down.
love.
God is love. Yes.
So
Very
well,
good.
you were also
Yes.
quoting another great
It's
scripture too.
my literacy is not where it should be. I apologize.
You're
Anyways,
totally fine.
it's all right.
But no, yeah, I completely agree with that. I do think that's a very forgotten thing, but please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's it's a hot take, but I
Okay.
think watching movies with friends
Mhm,
is redemptive of relationships. Human real human to human relationships.
mhm,
Some of the best moments in which I felt deeply connected with an individual was bef during the movie watching affair
mhm,
and discussing our thoughts after.
mhm,
Just allows for just, like, a deep I would use the word intimacy, in which, like, we both were just a part of this same thing. We're gonna forget about everything we've ever done to each other. We're gonna talk about the power of the story. Most recently, my apartment roommates and Eli Dunn, along with some other people, watched The Shining. And if you know this, The Shining is not the most Christian movie. I'll admit, I'll confess. There are moments that pointed to the depravity of human beings, but nonetheless, we watched that and we all were just so obsessed with it that we were just gonna talk about it
mhm.
for hours and hours and hours, and we did. That's really all we talked about after. We went to cookout and had a great discussion about
Always
it.
cook out.
So there's an aspect in which in movie watching is something that connects individual people in a way that any other art form can't.
Okay.
Music is more like general,
Mhm.
I guess. It can be very intimate. You can listen to music with somebody and feel very connected with them. I'm not gonna, like, disregard that.
Sure.
But I think movies make it easier because you're kind of forced just to be a part of it.
Mhm.
You're forced to pay attention and be mindful, right? And just feel empathy towards these fake people that aren't
Mhm.
real.
Right.
It's insane. So it just provides room for the spirit just to build relationships and connections with non-brothers and sisters in Christ. It provides the opportunity for evangelistic conversation.
Mhm.
We watch this movie about maybe an allegory to, I don't know, homosexuality or whatever,
Sure.
right? What are your thoughts on that? Is this true? What do you believe about this?
Mhm.
What does Christ say about this from a Christian worldview? How do we view this, right?
Absolutely.
So art forms like movies provide a way and a kind of a gateway towards gospel conversations. And I've actually taken advantage of that numerous times, and it's provided some most beautiful and God glorifying conversations.
Mhm.
I'm reminded of the Josh Joseph actually telling his brothers, "You took God took what the enemy meant for evil, right, and He turned it for good."
Mhm.
So you can watch movies that maybe aren't directly Christian, may have some inappropriate times. This is entirely different discussion. We can talk about, like, whether or not,
Right.
we should watch secular later.
Right.
But nonetheless, we can take what we see and bring goodness out of it, and it's
Absolutely.
such a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
Thirdly, I think this kind of goes back with the theatrical part of my life. Just the ability to tell a story
Mhm.
and make it come to life, and getting to watch that story or be a part of that story is just so epic. You know,
Yes.
theater really helped me in that area of my life. I didn't know anything about the tech part of theater. I didn't know everything it took, but just getting to see the connection that everyone who was a part of it, the viewers, the cast, the director, the tech crew, just they all were part of this same thing. And and everyone is kind of new, like, this is good. This is a beautiful thing that God is rejoicing over. And it points to the greatest story of all, the story of Jesus and the world is probably the greatest movie of all time, and I would argue it is.
I would also argue
Yeah.
that it is. Best live action one too.
Oh, ma most definitely, most definitely. Um, and I just remember those moments being so sweet and so pure and just being like, "Man, this is how it's meant to be. Let's not take this moment, this fake story, and kind of idolize it to the point that we're not being appreciative of the real story." Right? When you watch a movie, don't just be like, "Oh, man, that was a great story. I'm glad I got to be a part of that."
Mhm,
Remember, you're in a story as well,
mhm,
and probably a better one.
mhm.
Your ability to empathize with other people is severely heightened once you become acquainted with film, and I will assert that till the day of my death,
Mhm.
genuinely. I have such a more magnified scope of what it is to be human and to live and to be a part of God's creation
Mhm.
than before I wasn't really into film, because I
Oh,
know
yeah.
everyone has a story now,
Mhm.
right? Everyone's dealing with a million things that you don't know they're dealing with, and there is something deeply, deeply spiritual about that. You have a story. I don't know the entirety of it. I know the gist of it, but I know there was a conflict and that was resolved,
Absolutely.
right? And it just creates a very positive humanitarian worldview the more you get into just stories and the beauty of
Absolutely.
them. So yeah, that would be my main thing if you have any.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's very interesting that you bring up the conflict needing resolved, like going back to
Mhm.
your very first point and the point that you just
Yeah.
reiterated right
Yeah.
there. Because I mean, in a much more interpersonal sense, that is our testimony, right?
Mm.
And it is our what's called coming to Christ that
Mm.
is be like our sin being resolved on the cross, us accepting that gift of salvation and like being saved,
Yeah,
right? That is that being resolved.
for sure.
And then sanctification and the process
Mm.
afterwards is a whole other story, a sequel,
Yeah,
if you will.
if you will.
But
We're being saved. Yeah, it's
right,
good.
just continuous growth towards Christ. And I mean, not to break it down into like a training scene in like a
Mhm.
movie, right? But like
Yeah.
in a sense, it is right. That is like us gearing up
Yeah.
and like constantly becoming closer and closer to Christ, becoming
Insert
more
Rocky
prepared.
music.
Exactly.
He's just running on the he's yeah.
Any of the Creed movies,
Yeah.
just like
Yeah.
all those. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But no, yeah, I think that. But I also think it's very interesting to observe because how you are saying, and I agree with you in
Mhm.
this, that humans inherently want to see an end and want to know the end
Mhm.
and want to know how things are going to play out,
That's right.
what that is. I think not to tie this into eschatology. I'm going to do a
Oh, no,
great
what have you
job
done?
to
What have you done?
keep this in and keep it reeled in on film. But in that sense, where we read Revelation, we read
Mhm.
Matthew 24, we
Yeah.
read the back part, the back half of Daniel, right, 7 through 12. We see these things and we are fearful, as some Christians are, when they are inherently written not for fear in like a Christian's life, but for confidence
Mm.
and to inspire that, hey, you will face persecution,
That's
you
right.
will suffer for my name. However, I will return and you will be lifted up into heaven with me, and
Mm.
you will get to worship me, and you'll get to be in eternity in paradise. And
Yeah.
I like not to say that I haven't been afraid and that there aren't moments where I will succumb to fear of these things because at the end of the day, that is our fleshly desire to like,
Yeah.
oh, but what about my wife and family? What about my friends? What about
Mm.
this, that, or the other? Right? When
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes,
Mhm.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna push it down y'all's
Yeah.
throats. Nothing matters in this world. But I think that's a very interesting dynamic because we want to see our sin resolved. Absolutely. Everyone wants to see their
Yeah.
sin resolved, whether they know it or not. And like even people of a secular worldview
Mhm.
that aren't Christians, aren't saved, they want to see their sin resolved. They just don't acknowledge it as sin
Yeah.
and they try to numb it with things of this
Mhm.
world. And so I think it's a very interesting dynamic to see that in one sense, we want to see that ending. And then in another sense, we are terrified of that ending. And I think that also ties very well
Yeah.
into film because
Oh, for sure.
would you like get into that, like how your dad was crashing out over what there's so many open-ended things that
Yeah.
are happening
Yeah.
here. What the heck is happening? Oh my gosh. I hate that this is going on.
Yeah.
It's this, that, and the other. There's also that equal sense of like people love a cliffhanger.
Mm.
People also like they want there to be that they want there to be a sequel. They want it to keep going. They
Yeah.
don't want it to end. Like when people are watching a show, like at least for me personally, this isn't necessarily film, but I think
Yeah.
it's also very applicable because like whenever I'm not a big Harry Potter fan, not a fan of the movies, fan of the world building,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
that's a separate convo
Okay.
for another
Yeah.
day. Um, Whenever Harry Potter, like I went through and watched all the Harry Potter
Mhm.
movies, right? Not any of the Fantastic Beasts, but like the original 8
Yeah.
Harry Potter movies. Whenever I finished watching the 8th one, I was saddened because it ended, and I knew that, like, I would h even though I would, like I could very much go back and rewatch it, there was still that level of I just spent, what, probably close to 25, 28 hours of my life growing closer, like,
Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
these characters, understanding how they worked, what made them tick, why they wanted to do the things they wanted to do, what their drives, their motivations, all this were, and then it ended, and I no longer had that, and I got brought back into reality where I realized, "Oh,
Yeah.
this is this isn't real. This is all fake," which I understood, obviously. I wasn't like, "Oh, the 3rd Harry Potter movie," then going out trying to do what's called wizardry and
Mhm.
witchcraft in my driveway
Yeah.
by any means, but it's still a level of, like I think that's very interesting because it was a melancholy feeling
Yeah.
of things ending, and I think on a relational aspect too,
Mhm.
with our friends, like, whenever there's a change in life or something
Mm.
that we
Oh, it's
have
so
to
good.
part ways with, there's that level of, "Wow, it's over. It's not the same. I'm not gonna be as in touch with them
Yeah.
as I once was." Whether that be in a relationship with a significant other that ended, or
Yeah.
like my two of my closest friends, Micah and Logan, whenever I came down into college, the last night before I came here, this is how this night went. We played poker together.
Mhm.
We went and hung out, sat in front of my driveway for like 2.5 hours and just reminisced because we acknowledged, oh, this is our time together. 3 years in the books of intentionally loving one another, being each other's close community. Yes, there was ups and downs. However, there was a level of love there that we knew that like was very unique to our friendship. But because of that, there was also
Mm.
like no perfect thing will last forever unless it's Jesus. And that relationship with them was by no means perfect, but there was that love there. That what's called love your neighbor as yourself, that
Right.
Jesus level, like we loved each other and cared about each other. And we wanted to see each other succeed. So there was that level of melancholy that I was leaving for college because they both were staying. But I was happy for them because I was leaving while they were succeeding. And they knew that I was leaving to a place that would allow me to be
Yeah.
successful.
Yeah.
And
Do a
that
podcast with this Canaan guy.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is gonna blow up, right? But in that same sense where we are terrified to see that ending in real life on a much larger scale with the revelation and
Mhm.
whatnot, even though it should inspire confidence after
Yeah.
we watch like series like Harry Potter, Star Wars, whatever it may be, whatever your favorite movie series is.
Mhm.
After you watch that, there should be that level of like, wow, that was a great movie. That was a great film. I'm super excited that I got to watch that. Really glad to be
Yeah.
in this spot. There's that still that level of, oh, well, it's over, right?
Mhm.
And I don't, we won't feel that when we're in heaven,
Yeah.
right? Because we'll be in heaven, we'll be worshiping God. But I find it interesting
Yeah.
that there's that level of concern that we have towards um the end times. And I understand like not even just in life, also in our
That's
relations.
good, man.
I think that's just very
Yeah.
interesting.
2 notes, maybe
Mhm.
3.
Go on.
Um, Responding to your, like, Ecclesiastes thing. So, like, a few weeks ago, there was also another apartment movie that we
Okay.
watched that, like, goes hand in hand with what you're talking about.
Dude, I love
It's
Ecclesiastes.
called Patterson,
Mhm.
and it's with Adam Driver, and
Okay.
Adam Driver is a bus driver, and it goes through a week of Adam Driver's life, and there's really no plot.
Mhm.
It's just, like, he drives the bus, he gets home, hugs his wife, eats dinner with his wife, walks his dog, grabs a drink at the bar and talks to the bartender,
Mhm.
goes back, talks with his wife some more, goes to bed, wakes up, does it all over again. The climax in the movie is his bus shuts down and he has to figure out how to make it work again.
Mhm.
But in that moment, you feel so connected with that like climactic point that you understand just like, oh, maybe like mundanity is beautiful, right? This life, it's m- it may not be as like epic in the sense of like huge and just like abounding with glory as one may think, but maybe like the nothing happening is so beautiful that you value like the smaller moments so much more. My review on Letterbox was nothing happens. Or does everything happen?
That's so deep, but that's so real.
The fact that nothing is happening,
Mhm.
that nothing matters, can make you ascribe value
Mhm.
to things that don't matter,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And it's such a beautiful thing. First, that's my first note. Second note, recently, amongst Gen Z, the past few years, I've noticed like this kind of I want to be the main character.
Yes, I was actually gonna talk about that too as
Oh,
well, but no, go
here we
on.
are. Here we are.
Same wavelength.
This may be what you're gonna say, but
Okay,
like
go on.
we all have this inherent desire and
Mhm.
this kind of subconscious knowledge that like, yeah, I'm, the main character.
Mhm.
And this world, the story of the world is actually revolving around me
Mhm.
and to my good and my benefit. And Christianity flips that on its head
Mhm.
and says, no, you're not the main character. You're not David. You're the Philistine, not the Philistines. You're not, hopefully, you're not the Philistines. You may be. You're the Israelites shaking in their boots,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
And God's the main character. Christ is the main character who introduced himself into your life. And without him, you would be nothing. And it's so beautiful. So yeah, I think that's it. I
Yeah.
think those are my 2 notes that
Yeah.
I wanted to respond to.
And I think adding on to that, main character syndrome is how me and my friends refer to that. Is where like you desire to be the main
Mhm.
character. I don't even necessarily. I think you may be a David, but you aren't God, and that's 100% the fact. Like
Yeah.
the fact of the matter. So like something that me and my four like close friends from back home,
Mhm.
Micah, Logan, and Robert, right? Me and Micah and Logan were discussing one day about this, and we are like, okay, so if we're like Ryan Gosling characters, who are we,
Oh,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And so like, what's it called? Logan was La La
Oh, for
Land.
sure.
Micah was what's it called The Notebook.
Blade Runner? Is there
Oh
one?
no, no, yeah, yeah, he was
Yeah,
Officer K, not The Notebook. He was Officer
yeah,
K from Blade Runner.
yeah. Great movie,
Um,
by the way.
I still haven't seen it. He
Oh, it's
recommended it to me
incredible.
like so. I think two
Yeah.
or maybe 3 years ago.
Mm.
I've yet to see it. It'll be watched one
Let's
day,
watch it.
dude. I'm down after this,
Maybe.
possibly.
Perchance. Yeah.
Perchance. But going back on what I was saying, like Robert was Ken, I was Colt Seavers from The Fall Guy. We're just having a good time, a goof around with it, right,
Yeah.
if you will. But like, there's a level of after you watch these movies, you're like you might not inherently vocalize it, but
Mhm.
like if you after you watch Star Wars, you kind of there's like that longing to be Anakin
Yeah.
Skywalker, like
Watching after you watch Batman and something in the way is playing in the background, something, and you're like, "Oh my god."
exactly
Yeah.
like there's a level of like and, like even those soundtracks in those movies like that will trigger you to think that way or to
Yeah.
what's it called want to be that,
Yeah.
right? We don't do that with Jesus, and we don't do that with the Gospels, I feel like.
Mhm.
At least in my personal analysis of how most
Oh,
people
wow.
study the Gospels, I feel like it's a matter of like we read it as if it's something more of a story that is like we read it as it's a story, but we don't long for it the same way that you long for to be Anakin Skywalker, right? Obviously, that is so
Yeah.
unrealistic,
Just watch
but
The Chosen, man. I'm
right.
joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm so sorry. We'll fix all your needs. Oh,
Right.
never mind. I it's
Anyway,
that was good.
that's hilarious. The Chosen. Anyway, like how we inherently desire to be Anakin Skywalker, or we inherently desire to be Harry Potter, whoever it is. I'm using the most basic examples, right? Because like, everyone's gonna get that. If pulled out, no, like the character from Everything Everywhere All at Once, whose name I'm drawing a blank on right now, but if I drew that,
That guy
no,
or the girl.
the girl, I'm talking about the girl. If I drew that name out there, they could be like, everyone's who?
You
Everyone knows
seen
who Harry
John
Potter is.
Saylor and I watched that movie and he
Yeah,
was weeping vehemently.
I love that movie.
It's a great movie.
Great movie, 8.8 out of 10.
Very
But
good.
back to what I was saying though, we don't long to be Christ-like in that same manner. I think it's a much different
Oh
manner, and
yeah.
I think when the closer, like some people are much more emotional in their faith, which is not an inherently bad thing. It can be, but so can be being more logical in your faith. That's not an inherently bad thing, but it can be. So me, I'm not someone that like I love Christ. I do, right? But I would also say that I have not weeped over Christ
Mm,
nearly as much than some of my friends have, right? And that's not to say that I don't love
yeah.
Christ any less. I would say that that has been a struggle in my faith is like, how do I love Christ effectively? But that's just not like I have not weeped over my friends, the what's called at that level. I've not weeped over
Yeah.
my family. I'm just not that. That's just not how I show my love.
Mm,
But so in that same sense, though, where people will see these main characters and long to be them and desire to be them. I feel like for people who are much more emotional and a much more unlike connect with Jesus and that relational sense of emotion, they do long to be him. But I feel like that's something that like in my life I find interesting. I
yeah.
read the gospels and I'm not like left there being like, oh, I want to be Jesus. I need it because it's an incomprehensible amount of love.
Mm,
But for whatever reason, when you watch these movies, the characters are written in a sense that there is a relatability to them and that you could kind of see where they're coming from when these things you can
yeah.
it's a lot easier to root for them because they feel like us.
Yeah.
It's not an incomprehensible or inachievable act to do.
I think the important thing to remember
Mhm.
is that Christ was the suffering servant,
Absolutely.
right? I mentioned it earlier, but like Christ has dealt, and we forget about this so much, and it's so important to just the Christian walk and the Christian life. But there is not one thing that you have been tempted with that Christ was not also tempted with. There is not
Absolutely.
one bodily feeling that you
Hmm.
felt that that he didn't feel. Like he's acquainted with our grief and he's acquainted with our suffering.
Hmm.
And nonetheless he persevered unto the end, unto the cross, right?
Hmm.
And it should give us a willingness and a fervor to do that.
Hmm.
And far too often we don't. I don't.
I don't.
I'm in your camp.
Hmm.
That's such a good point that you
Yeah,
make. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because I mean, and then that's not something that people inherently strive for. It's more of
Hmm.
a thing that I find interesting to look at on a psychological level.
Oh yeah.
Because like when I watch The Fall Guy,
Oh,
right, I'm not thinking I want to be Colt Seavers.
yeah.
It's just like I'm left there with the relatability of it. And so when you read the Gospels, I mean, even like because there are instances like that. Like whenever I read, I believe Acts 9 is where Stephen gets stoned and killed, or maybe it's Acts 7. It's somewhere in there.
Somewhere. It's
Acts
out of
7 through
place.
9. It's what's called 7, 8, or 9.
Yeah.
It's one of them.
Yeah.
But after reading that, it's 60 verses in that chapter,
Hmm.
and it's Stephen giving his um like defense
Yeah.
to the Sanhedrin about why he like essentially basically this is what the law is. Y'all are wrong. Get cooked,
Yeah.
nerds. And then he gets stoned to death.
Yeah.
Right. And
And
it concludes with what's it called? Forgive them for they know not what they do. And something with reading that story really resonates and hits me. So we did a podcast a while ago titled Main Character Syndrome, where me and Mike could go over like some of our favorite characters. And Stephen is my favorite character outside of Jesus in the
mm,
Bible because I feel like there is that level of relatability that I want to be a Stephen in the kingdom of God, right?
mm,
Someone that will, yes, have the knowledge to know to do what's right, but also
preach
be
Christ.
like to preach Christ to do what He has commanded me to do, but also to be sacrificial the same way that He was. So I think in that same sense, even though I did not, whenever I read the Gospels, have that longing to be like Christ, longing to be exactly him. I still strive for that on a logical level, on a
Yeah.
mental level of like, I want my steps to look like him. I
Yeah.
want to mirror him.
Mm,
But that emotional longing
mm,
comes from another human.
yeah.
I think that's interesting.
There was something I read yesterday by Francis of I could butcher this like Assisi
Oh,
is he
I
was
don't
a
know.
early church guy and
Mhm.
he writes there is no point in walking to go preach if your walking isn't your preaching.
Mm, yeah, and that ties very well with the book, oh, I think it's Just Do Something.
Yeah,
Are you familiar with that?
yeah,
Yes, if you're not familiar with that, essentially what the book talks about, Bargo told me about this, I've yet to read the book, but, essentially what it talks about is, you might have an idea of you want to go do this in your
yeah,
ministry, but what are you doing right now?
yeah,
And so I think that ties very well, it echoes that idea
yeah,
in a very much more, like, if you're walking to go preach, why are you not preaching while you're walking? Is
yeah,
that how it goes? Or
yeah.
yeah, I
Like
mean,
what the way you conduct yourself
mhm,
when you're not, I guess, deliberately, palpably sharing the gospel with somebody, um, is vital to the legitimacy of the gospel you preach,
absolutely.
right? Preach the gospel, and when it's necessary, use words,
Mhm,
right? Just,
absolutely.
just be a redemptive person. Be a kind, graceful, forgiving, truthful individual, and
Right.
I trust God with what will happen after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a level of, like, are you familiar with the phrasing that you might be the only Bible that someone reads?
Mm,
It's that same thing. It's the same mindset, the same mentality that is in there.
yeah.
And then there's one more, what's called kind of sub point. I don't know how long we'll go on this one,
Okay.
but like just wherever the conversation
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
us, that I feel like we have yet to, what's it called, discuss is spiritual warfare. I find to be very present
Hmm.
in film and like obviously in the world around us in all areas and in all aspects. But I feel like it's very disregarded when it comes to the movies we watch. And I'm not someone that's we shouldn't be watching secular movies. I'm not of that opinion. I watch secular movies all the time. I'm an ex movie critic
Yeah.
and still currently critique
Mm,
as I go.
very good.
But in the sense of like whenever you were if you watch like The Conjuring or a movie that's actively like showing demons and like
Yeah.
demonic presence and
Hmm.
whatnot, there's a level of realism to that. Like, are you familiar with the movie The Pope's Exorcist?
No.
Okay. So there's a movie that like it actually came out a while ago called The Pope's Exorcist, but they remade it
Hmm.
recently. I have not seen that movie, but my other movie critic friends have. And a couple of the secular ones actually said, "Isaac, you would really like this movie." I was like, "Okay, why? Like, why is that?" I highly doubt it because I don't watch horror movies for the most part because I don't want to entertain that. Like,
Presence. Yeah.
exactly the opposition. I don't
Yeah.
want to entertain it. It's the same way that you wouldn't entertain a temptation
Oh
by
yeah.
like you wouldn't entertain sexual sin by watching porn, which is sin in of it in and of itself. So it's a little different, but like you wouldn't do that. You wouldn't entertain the thought of it and see how far you can go. So I just don't like to entertain the
Yeah.
opposition. I don't hold people who do
Yeah.
watch horror movies against that.
But playing devil's advocate here,
Sure,
is there not spiritual warfare in movies that aren't explicitly spiritually combative?
absolutely. I'd argue there's spiritual warfare in movies that are Christian.
Oh yeah.
If you see, especially in the sense of doubt, if you see in a Christian movie or a Christian show, oh well, like there's The Forge recently came out. That's a
Hmm.
movie that a lot of Christians are raving about,
Yeah.
right? I saw it. I don't review Christian movies because my like
Yeah.
my raw
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Christ is gonna take over versus absolute cinema.
Yeah.
Isaac is gonna take it versus that, and it's just gonna be
Did you know that?
conflicting.
You know Joy Kendrick?
No,
She's a student here at the Cumberlands, and her family is like the
what they?
behind the movie, like
Oh,
people who
really?
yeah, they have
That's
like a
awesome.
business or something. I think so. If Skylar Plementosh, if you're listening to this, just like critique us if we're saying anything wrong. But I
Right,
think like her family, she's a student here,
dude. That's awesome.
and she like her family like is
Hmm.
people who like made it,
Help make
which
that.
is cool.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and I think that's like I think it's a good movie. But I could also very much see a world where a new believer or even an old one sees because like I think as you get more spiritually mature in the faith, you start to recognize and
Yeah.
realize it's not all happy and like, oh, butterflies, rainbows, whatnot. And there's that like that's not at all what the movie is showing, but
Mhm.
like you still see that like young faith of a new believer, which is awesome and inspiring to see. But I feel like there's a level of doubt that you can get from
Yeah.
that because oh, my relationship with God doesn't look like this, but this looks super powerful.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's could be spiritual opposition in both secular,
Yeah.
like super demonic,
And in
and
between.
Christian film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Spirit,
Christian,
there's
yeah.
going to be opposition everywhere in your life, and it's our job to
Mm.
discern where these spirits are coming
Yeah.
from.
I think we aren't as in tune with the spiritual world as we ought to be.
I completely agree.
Um, I think as Paul says, he says, we are not fighting, worldly powers. There's
Mhm,
like a spiritual uh, clash happening,
mhm.
um, everywhere at all time until Christ's return, in which it's all just done with,
Absolutely.
um, which is a hopeful thing to think about. But yeah, I think it's important to realize that all conflict in its essence is spiritual conflict.
Mhm.
It may not always have to be dealt with
In a
in like a
spiritual
super
level.
spiritual light.
Mhm.
Sometimes just common sense and just practicality is good because those things are of God,
Yes.
right? I would argue. Um, but in most simplicity, every conflict is can be spiritual, and Satan and spiritual forces are playing a part. Some are more palpable, some are more tangible, some are more invisible, right? Uh, but nonetheless, it's important to know and remind ourselves that Christ is supreme and that he is over it all and sovereign over it all. And he's up out of that grave, you
Mhm.
know, and they're shaking in their boots now.
Absolutely.
Just a reminder. I'm not really entirely sure as to whether I should watch horror movies or not. I
Mhm.
I have watched like really demonic stuff, and I do kind of regret it. But there is like a flip side to it, to where like mm, I'm watching a story that is tangibly more spiritual, and the ending of it, whether portrayed in the movie or not, is that Christ wins,
Mhm.
right? Um,
I also think it's interesting to watch how the secular world views spirituality
mm,
because there's I forget which theologian said this. Well, I'm repping this off of some theologian,
okay,
right? In the modern church, modern like Western church, first world countries,
yeah,
right? What would we say, obviously, other than ourselves and our sin, but like when it comes to religious beliefs
yeah,
and like spirituality, what's the biggest threat against Christianity? Well, most people would argue atheism, right? Those like when you are a Christian, you typically think as of the primary combatant as an atheist who disagrees with you, right? Those
yeah,
are the people that you're going to debate Christianity with. Whenever you're in much more spiritual countries, not necessarily all third world countries
okay,
are like this, but like ones that are much more in tune with spirits and like
mm,
in belief of that, what they're going to encounter is a lot more demonic possession and a lot more things like that and oppression on a spiritual level.
yeah,
Because why would Satan then push an area like let's take America, which is predominantly Christian, right? Or claims that it's predominantly Christian. Why would he then send a bunch of spirits, demon possession, and whatnot into America, and then because of the fear of that, push people into the churches? Right?
yeah,
He's not going to do that. He's going to come and attack in a different manner versus there where there's a bunch of different churches and like say there's a shaman, you go to an area where shaman are very
yeah,
common and then demonization and demon possession occurs, you're going to go to the shaman instead of a Christian church because a Christian church wasn't planted or Christianity is illegal or so on and so forth. He's going to attack in that manner. But so I find it interesting to look at how the secular world perceives spirituality. Because
oh
if you
yeah,
watch like Longlegs came out
oh
and
yeah,
he's a saint, the guy, the main I guess antagonist,
yeah,
the character that you follow though, in the movie is a Satanist. And when you watch movies like The Conjuring
Mhm.
and these things like other things like that, you get to see a worldview that is foreign to us because we have an understanding of what demons are actually like and demonic presence is like because we see it in the Bible and we know that that's true. Whereas
Yeah.
they are going off of things that they have heard in their research and like however they perceive it. And I
Yeah.
find it very interesting to look at, which ties back into what I was saying about the Pope's exorcist, where there's a scene where the Pope's exorcist rebukes a demon in Jesus' name, if I'm correct. If you've seen the Pope's exorcist, I've not actually seen it. I'm going by word of mouth. That's why my movie critic friend said you would like this movie a lot because what's
Yeah.
called the exorcist rebukes a demon in Jesus' name, and I'm like, oh, well, that is a very biblical perspective on how you would. Now, granted, the Pope's exorcist, like Catholicism and exorcism via like that may look a lot different than how the Bible says to rebuke Satan in Jesus' name and it'll cast out. That's the important piece. I've not actually seen the scene,
Yeah.
but I do find it interesting that a movie that's inherently secular and that is highlighting demonic possession and demonization and things like that still accurately portrays what a exorcism would be modeled like and like how
Mhm.
you would rebuke in Jesus' name a demon
Yeah.
in real life. I find that interesting because I don't know the director, I don't know who that person is who like made this movie
Okay.
happen, but in I'm going to assume that it is coming from a secular mindset, a secular worldview. And because of that, I find it very interesting that they would get that right and that there is that level of understanding there.
This ties in with a conversation that Eli Dunn and I actually had on in my car on the drive back from church one evening. The conversation revolved around if you, heaven forbid, and this is we were being really hypothetical.
Right.
Um, he was like, if you were to leave the faith and you stripped all lenience upon Christ, what would be the thing that just still nags at you? You know,
Okay.
this messes with you. And I what I said doesn't really matter, but he said the idea of mysticism and like spiritual warfare.
Hmm.
There have been multitudes and multitudes of stories of spiritual presences,
Hmm.
and all of them are cast out in the name of Christ Jesus,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
They're conquered through Christ. Here, they do not say, get out in the name of Allah,
Hmm.
get out in the name of reason, get out in the name of human rights, you know?
Right.
Get out in the name of Buddha.
Right.
Whatever name you get out in the name of Joseph Smith, you
Mm.
know? I'm not disregarding that there have been people who have faked it,
Hmm.
right? But everyone has to be lying for it to not be true.
Real.
That demons are just conquered through Christ, and that spiritual presences that are fighting against us every day are conquered through Christ. It would all have to be a big sham, and everyone would have to be in on it.
Hmm.
And just that fact, I consider myself I'm a Christian and I believe in Christ, but I consider myself to be a more spiritual person. I feel like I'm more in tune with the spiritual realm than others are.
Sure.
I don't know if that's true. It's my conviction. It's what
Yeah.
my
No, I'm
conscience tells me
inclined to
so.
agree with that.
And whenever I kind of like feel, oh, this is like odd. There's like a like like the devil's kind of working, you
Hmm.
know. He's doing something that I'm not a that Christ doesn't agree with. Whenever I pray, and I'm like, God, help me remember that Christ has conquered, and help me lean on him in this time and help him shine through me in this conversation I'm about to have, in this act I'm about to partake in, right? let Christ shine forth, and I know that He will give victory and that He will cease any storm, spiritual storm.
Mhm,
And it's never really failed me,
mhm.
you know? And I think that if I were to, and I'm not, because I've been sealed by the Spirit,
Right.
but if someone like me were to have kind of deconstructed, I guess, the, the fact of the spiritual world out there and its tangibility and its presence and its realness would just be something that I couldn't get off my mind in
Yeah.
my opinion. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like even in I know people who have performed exorcisms, like it cast out demons in
Hmm.
the Jesus name. But I think for me, one story that like encompasses and like I already believed and knew that demons were real and knew that there was what's it called ways to entertain
Yeah.
demonic presence
Yeah.
beforehand. But I think what like really solidified it in my head that like it's present and real and it's interesting to observe is I whenever I'm back home I do contracting, right? And so there is this house. I'm not going to get we call it what's it called, a specific name, but the name is literally just the address, so
Hmm.
I'm going to reserve it because it's being rented now.
Okay. All
So
right.
but
Very good. Very
right,
good. Good
very good,
job.
yes. But and I'm not going to out names or anything with it, but there was a I went there. I was the first person sent there to like begin cleaning out the house. So that way we could start remodeling
Hmm.
it and redoing it. And then we could make it
Yeah.
right for renting. And so me and my boss, we were there and we were doing it. We were what's it called, like kind of talking about it. He said, "All right, I gotta go." Because and, like from the moment like he told gives me the rundown of everything that we're supposed to do. And not even necessarily when he left, from the moment that I got there, I just kind of felt paranoid. And I couldn't really determine and, like, make a distinction of what it was. And then when he left, it, like, was fully encompassed because my mind was no longer on other things. It was just me in this empty house where no one has lived for an extended period of time. And I felt a spiritual unwellness. Like, something was not right. Not a level of paranoia so much anymore, but that my spirit was not necessarily fearful,
Yeah.
but you could tell that there was something wrong. Unwell is how
Yeah.
I describe it.
Incomplete.
Exactly. And so I was in that house for 3 days by myself. Not 3 days, like, staying there overnight, but, like, 3 work days, I was working there by myself, just collecting things, picking things up, putting things away, whatnot. And whenever we discovered more and more stuff that hinted at that this was the person who had lived here lived a very adulterous life, and there's a lot of adultery committed in this house. And there's a lot of I'll go further in detail if you would like post podcast, but for the sake of, you know, keeping it PG, I won't go into the most detail of what some of the stuff that we found was, and also to keep private things private. But it was very interesting because there's a that spiritual and wellness there. And then we have a what's called a position in what's it called, the job that we work at, that's called a care pastor. And it's my buddy Sam because we all work as friends. And his job is kind of to like oversee that like everyone is like kind of doing good in their walk with Christ, and that like what's it called, they're doing good coming into work in their faith and things of that
Hmm.
nature. And he felt it too whenever he what's called got there. So there's a commonality of that where there's a spiritual wellness in this house. As soon as we pray over it, the day after, we like pray over the house that that Satan would be rebuked, that nothing would what's called come against us in this house. It's gone. And we no longer have that spiritual unwellness. And we feel protected. We still find some very sketchy, wacky things in this house, but it's not out of like we don't find it and then tremble anymore. We don't find it
Yeah.
and feel uneasy.
It's you're resting. You're at rest now.
Yes. Yes. I'm at rest now with it. Like I find it and it's still uncomfortable.
Mhm.
but it's not. As you put it, I'm at rest
Yeah.
with it, and I found that very interesting. That very much just solidified the spirituality, like spiritual warfare, the spiritual presence in this world because I had already believed it, but had yet to experience it
Yeah.
in any real form
Mhm.
outside of like the Holy Spirit moving or any real form that I couldn't have just chalked up to really anything else. Like for me, I mean, one could make an argument that that's just a psychological, like, oh, you prayed and then you thought you were fine. But to me, there's just genuinely no other explanation for that other than
Yeah.
it being a spiritual thing.
I think backing off the psychological
Mhm,
um, argument
mhm,
is that doesn't have to be like bad.
mhm.
A viewpoint that I like to take regarding worship
Sure.
is that like even if I don't feel like the words that I'm singing are true in the moment,
Mhm,
I'm still going to sing them
mhm.
and be like, God, make this true
In you, yes.
in me, like cultivate it within me.
Mhm,
And the fact of the praying that acknowledging that you did that like psychologically
mhm.
is a way that God can move,
Absolutely.
right? Because be honest, that it was never in jeopardy whether or not God would prevail. He
Oh,
knew
no.
he would,
Absolutely.
right? Nothing really changed.
Mhm,
God was over it. He was working, his hand was on it. All that really changed is that you acknowledged God's capacity to save and you rested in that.
mhm.
And so the argument that like it's a psychological thing, maybe God is working through psychology,
Absolutely.
you know?
I think that's very much a case.
Yeah,
However, with that being said, I think that's a nice place to wrap up the conversation. I think this is a very, very interesting, fruitful conversation that derives around film. And we did kind of get off track when it comes to film, but I think it's none the matter. That
yes,
spiritual importance, like that talking about spirituality, I think pushing that understanding of it
for sure.
allows us to also then view movies and view film
Yeah.
in that sense of, okay, this is a real thing that I am entertaining
Mm,
in this moment. Now, how am I going to combat this and how am I going to go about this?
very good.
But nonetheless, thank you for coming on the
Hey,
podcast. It was always great. It's great to have people on. It's great having you on. Thank you, listeners, for watching Two Creations, One Creator official on YouTube. If you want to see the video podcast, tune in next week for Jacob Ratliff. I'll see y'all.